Hey folks, in this video I'll teach you everything you need to know in order to kill Mythic Amalgamation Chamber, which is likely the third boss your guild will attempt in Aberrus the Shadowed Crucible. For the purposes of this guide, I'll be focusing specifically on how the fight changes in Mythic difficulty, so if you need a refresher on the baseline mechanics from Heroic and below, you can find my full Heroic Aberrus guide linked in the video description below. With that out of the way, let's discuss Mythic Amalgamation Chamber. The Mythic difficulty changes to this encounter all revolve around the Shadow and Fire debuffs that the bosses apply to the raid. While these debuffs would naturally expire after 20 seconds on Heroic, they now have an infinite duration and need to be removed manually. In order to clear off your debuff, you'll need to come into contact with a player who has the opposite debuff. This will trigger an AoE explosion centered around the spot where you cleared your debuff, and it'll also leave behind a light dot on you for 20 seconds. In order to make it easier to deal with this mechanic, your raid leader should assign every player a partner before the fight begins. When the time comes to clear your debuff during the encounter, all you'll need to do is find your partner and run on top of them to handle the mechanic. That being said, the process of having the raid clear their debuffs is still a tad bit more complicated, as you need to make sure everyone is able to easily find their partner and clear off them without splashing their AoE onto anyone else in the raid. The way my guild chose to accomplish this was by swapping the Shadow and Fire bosses multiple times during the fight. Whenever the Fire boss would cast Fiery Meteor, it would always align with the Shadow boss casting Coalescing Void, which is the mechanic that forces you to run away. The first two times these mechanics went out, my co-tank and I would drag the bosses to the center of the room and perform a taunt swap to make the bosses switch sides. If you do this quickly, the bosses won't be actively casting any abilities, meaning the 200% damage bonus they gain by being close together shouldn't cause any problems. Just make sure nobody clears their debuffs while the bosses are momentarily stacked, as otherwise it'll probably get you killed. Once you've successfully switched the bosses, everyone in your raid should now have both the Fire and Shadow debuffs, meaning they're able to clear their buffs by touching any other player in the raid. At this point, we had all players maintain a loose spread while people found their partners and removed their debuffs. You can also see in this footage that a few of our ranged DPS stayed towards the center of the room, which caused them to constantly gain stacks from both bosses. While this did cause them to take a bit of extra damage from the dots, they were able to clear off of each other whenever their stacks got too high, so they were never in any real danger. The advantage to doing this is that it allowed our Warlocks and Boomkins to damage both bosses at the same time, which helped us push into Phase 2 a bit earlier. Once the two bosses become immune and begin transitioning into the second phase, everyone in your raid needs to spread out to avoid taking damage from Volatile Amalgamation. This is a circle around every player in the raid which removes your existing Phase 1 debuffs, and you'll do splash damage to anyone standing nearby. Even after Phase 2 begins, you'll still want to make sure the raid is somewhat spread out, as there's one final new mythic ability called Shadow and Flame. The boss will periodically use this mechanic during the second phase of the fight, and it causes all players to explode, so it's important that you're spread out whenever this gets cast. After the explosions go out, half of your raid will receive the Shadow debuff from Phase 1, and the other half will receive the Fire debuff. You'll want to handle this just like you did at the start of the fight, and have everyone quickly but safely find a partner and remove their stacks. Since the application of the debuffs is completely random, you won't be able to consistently clear with your assigned partner from the first phase. Instead, you'll just need to communicate with your raid and find somebody with the opposite debuff who you can safely clear with. As long as the majority of your raid doesn't stack up and bomb each other, the second phase of the fight should be pretty simple. During our first kill, we had roughly half the raid die to Shadow and Flame, but we still managed to heal through the stacking debuff and finish off the boss. That covers everything you need to know in order to defeat the Amalgamation Chamber on Mythic difficulty. If you want to watch more raid guides for Heroic and Mythic Aberrus, you can find links to my guide playlists in the video description below.